And today's episode, we are ecstatic to dive into a very exciting running back class. We have some great players in 2025 that we think could really reinvigorate our dynasty roster. So, should we be targeting those picks? Also, what wide receivers are going to be there? I know we just had an amazing wide receiver class. There are a few names that we think are pretty exciting next year as well. So, we're excited to really get into that, as well as trades in actual leagues involving 25 firsts. Stick around for all that and more. And welcome into the Dino Construction Podcast. I'm your host, Justin, joined again by David and JP. We're all back in one place. Exciting. And we are excited to dive into the 25 class. I'm going to interview you guys about those great running backs that we are excited to be drafting next year. Please don't be like 2 years ago where they didn't get drafted so well outside of Bijan and Gibbs. Really hopeful for that. Also, some exciting wide receiver prospects to dive into. We're going to talk a bunch of trades that I made. So with all of that being said, let's go ahead and dive right into these exciting running back prospects. Considering this was the weakest position in the 2024 rookie class that we just saw, I really hope that this is true. I have some dynasty teams with a handful of 25 firsts that I'm hoping this can plug kind of long-term RB solutions. Long-term RB. I know, right? Oxymoron. Guys, is this class looking as strong as I've heard?
Yeah, I really like this RB class, as most do. I don't want to get too over my skis on this RB class a year out, since combine testing and landing spot matter so much for the position more than any other. But analytically, this class, it looks pretty darn good. We even saw two RB prospects in TreVeyon Henderson and Devin Neal, who are both probably going to would have been top 5 running backs in this last draft class if they came out. So just those two coming back to school and being in the 2025 class, that bolsters the, next year's class even that much more.
Yeah, I agree with JP. There's a lot of really exciting prospects in this class. It looks like we should have some top-end talent and some decent depth. You have concerns with NIL potentially getting guys to come back for an extra year. Injuries always change things. With last year's class being kind of weaker and, so many of these older running backs still holding on to lead jobs, if this class turns out to what we think it could be, there could be a lot of high-end draft capital running backs and a lot of turnover as far as the top of depth charts go. So, hopefully we see this much-needed infusion of youth to the running back position.
And who are some of these much-needed running backs that we are hoping get great draft capital and great landing spots next year?
So I'm going to start out here with Quinshon Judkins, who has a strong case to be the RB1 next year. As a freshman, he joined a backfield with Zach Evans at Ole Miss, and he immediately showed to be one of the best RBs in the SEC as a freshman. Zach Evans, he was a 5-star running back who averaged 7 yards a carry all through college. And this freshman running back put him in a change of pace role. Judkins ran for 1,567 yards and 16 touchdowns. Any freshman who does that in SEC has the potential to be a workhorse in the NFL. He followed that up with a solid second season. He had a little bit of a cold stretch to start the season, but reports said that he was playing through an injury. And that kind of tracks because he picked it up after the first 3 to 4 weeks. But Judkins, he's a strong, explosive player who can tempo his runs and accelerates quickly. He's a capable receiver. He has good size. So he's checking a lot of the boxes that we're looking for in a first-round running back. But he's transferred over to Ohio State this season. So he'll be sharing a backfield with another top running back prospect in TreVeyon Henderson, who you're about to hear about. But he will certainly see fewer touches this year. But he's already shown the ability to shoulder a whole workload. And this might, help keep him healthy and fresh coming into the NFL. I have heard some concerns about his character, so hopefully that isn't an issue that we have to worry about moving forward, though.
And David, the next guy, the teammate JP already alluded to, tell me about his Ohio State Buckeye backfield mate.
Yeah, I love this segment right here, right? Back-to-back Buckeyes. Probably most people's RB1 and RB2 in the class, too, if you're going to do rankings. You can pick the order you want. There's some other guys in that tier, but for me, I've got TreVeyon a little ahead of Quinshon, but I think it'll kind of depend on how they get used to. TreVeyon's 5'10", 212, elite breakaway speed when he's healthy. He won Virginia Gatorade Football Player of the Year in 2019. Was not able to play in 2020 due to COVID in Virginia, how they did high school football. I think they changed their schedule. He had a monster freshman season that put him on the NFL's radar. 1,248 rush yards, 15 touchdowns, added 312 yards through the air as well as 4 touchdowns. Suffered some injuries in year 2 and had a disappointing year. Played through them, though. Same thing last year, kind of played through some injuries. And, as an Ohio State fan, I watched him, and I do think it actually impacted the way he played. I think he was caring more about his team and their success than he was his personal numbers, which I respect, especially as a fan of his team. So last year he had 926 rush yards, 11 touchdowns, 6.2 per carry, added 19 catches for 229 yards through the air. He did get a 90.3 PFF offensive and rush grade. And he basically improved every relevant statistic from the 2022 season where he was very hampered by injury. And we've kind of alluded to this, but many, including myself, thought he would have declared for the draft this season, and he likely would have been one of the top 2, maybe top 3 backs taken in this class. So I was a little surprised to see him come back. This year we've got Judkins sharing the backfield with him, but we also have a new offensive coordinator at Ohio State, Chip Kelly. He loves to run the ball. I expect a timeshare, but I expect a lot of rushing attempts for both. So I think it could be beneficial. I think they could both stay healthy while also still having enough opportunity to showcase their skill set. So if Henderson can prove he's healthy and still has that elite burst, he's got as good a shot as anyone to be that RB1 next year.
Yeah, I mean, these are both teammates now who had incredible freshman seasons. I just think athletic testing is probably just going to be a differentiator here unless, there's a big statistical difference between these two. But the next running back I have up here is Nicholas Singleton. He was pegged as one of the freakiest athletes coming out of high school. Then he went to Penn State, the school notorious for having one of the best strength and conditioning programs. Coming out of high school, this running back, he could bench an impressive 405 pounds as a high schooler. He ran a 4.08 short shuttle at an opening event, which as a high schooler, he would have been third best at the RB position in the 2024 combine with that number. So this is a very strong, quick, great athletic running back. He sits at 6 foot, 224 pounds. So he already seems to have that NFL size and athleticism. But what has he done so far? He came into Penn State with another talented freshman, Kaytron Allen. And these two freshmen, they led the Penn State rushing attack with Singleton posting 1,061 rushing yards. And his teammate, Kaytron Allen, rushed for 867. Singleton, he appeared to be a potential first rounder, but unfortunately, he followed it up with a pretty disappointing season this last year. He got 15 more rush attempts in 2023, but his yardage total fell from 1,061 to 752. So his yards per carry went from 6.8 to 4.4. His teammate, Kaytron Allen, received only 1 more carry, so they got the same carries. Kaytron Allen had more rushing yards than Singleton this year. The one thing that did improve for Singleton was his reception total. He climbed from 11 receptions to 26, so there's at least a little bit of a bright spot there. Despite his poor 2023 season, Singleton, he's held in high regard due to that size, athleticism, and that freshman breakout. So if he can bounce back this year, much like we were hoping from TreVeyon Henderson after a poor, sophomore season, he could be in that conversation for RB1 or RB2 potentially because of that, really great athleticism and size.
And I definitely know there have been some very good running backs that have come out of Penn State. So hoping he can be one of them as well. David, who's your next guy?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk about this guy. He's one of my favorite prospects in this class just to watch. Love the profile. A couple of small concerns, but still really exciting. So he's 5'8", 206. A little small, but not too small for today's NFL, especially if he does, in fact, weigh in over 200 pounds. 195, whatever, you can get away with being a little under 200, but that always seems to stick out every draft season. People always mention that. He's going into his 3rd season, so he'd be an early declare if he does, in fact, declare. Just short of 1,000 scrimmage yards as a freshman and just short of 2,000 last year. Had 1,347 rush yards for 14 touchdowns. This is the fun part. He added 43 receptions, 569 receiving yards, and 5 touchdowns. So definitely a dual threat running back. 93.5 PFF rush grade was 5th best. 91.1 receiving grade was 2nd best among running backs. And the only running back to score above 90 in both.
That is receiving in a single season. That sounds like a career in college.
Yeah, he's pretty good at that. Not only that, but he led RBs and PFFs win above average, which is just, another wins above replacement, wins over, replacement player, whatever you want to call it, warp. We've heard the term. He was also top 20 in yards after contact per attempt, missed tackles force and breakaway percentage. And he led all RBs in yards per route run. Not a big surprise given the stats I've seen, but get this 3.39 yards per route run as a running back. That is a really good number. I don't want people to take this out of context because we know what Jameer has done in the NFL, and that's way more important than anything you can do in your prospect profile. But he compares pretty favorably to him. Very similar size. Jameer is 5'9", 199. When we look at career yards after contact per attempt, Jeanty is at 406, Gibbs at 3.51. Missed tackles first per attempt, Jeanty 0.33, Gibbs 0.28. Yards per route run, career 2.86 to 2.37. And career best 3.39, as we just talked about, to 3.24 from Gibbs. Neither are very good pass blockers, but in their last season, Gibbs had a 21 PFF pass block grade. Jeanty was at least 66.5. So could be a sample size issue, but it could also show that maybe you don't have to pull him out on every down where you're expecting a blitzer. If this guy has another high-end season like this, he might be my favorite running back in this class. I mean, the only real negative I have on him is he's still at Boise State. He didn't transfer anywhere. And there's so much more that goes into a decision like transferring than we like to admit. He's a human being that has other reasons besides just trying to maximize his profile. So I'm not going to knock that against him too much. But we do need to see another elite production profile if he's going to be playing non-Power 5 competition.
I mean, like a Kamani Vidal type of guy, great production profile, went in the 6th round. Sometimes NFL teams can discount that a little bit. JP, who is the next guy you're going to talk about here?
Yeah, I just want to say one quick thing on Jeanty. I really love him too. He's like a little joystick out there. I will say, I do worry just because, like you said, Justin, him not being at Power 5 school, if that limits his upside draft capital wise. I think he could be a day 2 guy, but I do think that might limit him a little bit. And the only other concern I have is, which I can't tell right now, but I just wonder about his athleticism a little bit. Hopefully it's not like a Bucky Irvin type situation. I don't think he's as, I think he might be comparable, but Jeanty's a little bigger, I will say. So, but I'm rooting for him. He's a really, really fun player to watch.
Yeah, that combine is going to be very important for him, for sure.
100%. I think he could be round 2 if he comes, with a good 40 time. The next player I want to talk about here is Ollie Gordon. He really wasn't on many Devy radars coming into college. When looking at his size, though, he comes in listed at 211 pounds. He's got solid size. As a freshman, he wasn't used a ton, which is fine for college running back. Usually, there's junior and senior running backs who have seniority. They get the bulk of the carries. But Gordon had 308 rushing yards as a freshman. But what he did to put himself on the map really was his remarkable sophomore season. Ollie Gordon won the Doak Walker Award for Best College Running Back with a breakout to the tune of 1,732 rushing yards. He also had 39 receptions on top of that for 330 yards and 22 total touchdowns. That's a total of 2,062 scrimmage yards. He's shown he can be a bell cow already. He can be effective on the goal line, and he can contribute as a pass catcher as well. So that's what's really exciting about Ollie Gordon. Ollie Gordon has good athleticism. I'm just not sure if it's elite athleticism, as we kind of talked about with Jeanty. It's tough to say at this point, though. But I do think that he does have a chance to be RB1 because of that gaudy production that he had. Sometimes there's running backs that are super productive, though, and they don't even go day 1, day 2. If the athleticism comes through, though, I think he will be there.
In general, do we have any concerns? So Oklahoma State running back, right? When they're playing against maybe conference opponents that we don't consider the Big 12 as a defensive conference. It's the shootout conference, right? I view it a little bit similar to non-Power 5 schools. It's not a non-Power 5 school, but it's not the SEC. It's not the Big 10. I think it is possibly something to keep an eye on. I'd be interested to see how he tests at the combine as well. Definitely something to keep an eye on. David, who's your next guy here?
Yeah, I'll just say kind of to your point there, you can only play the teams on your schedule. And when you dominate the way Ollie has dominated, you're going to be a little less caring about who those defenses are. But I think that's a fair point. And the other thing I'll say on Ollie is he does run a little upright, and he's about 6'2", I think, maybe a shade under. So he's a little tall for the position he runs upright. I think those are maybe the only knocks on him. Very exciting player, though. So I'll move on to my guy. This is, I think, probably the first guy I would put outside of that top tier. I think those 5 players we've mentioned so far are kind of in a tier of their own. I'm still very excited about this guy. He might make some people's top 5 lists. He is outside of my top 5, though, at running back 6 currently. It's Omarion Hampton from UNC. He's 6', 220, so good size for the position. He'll be going into his 3rd season, so would also be an early declare. He won the North Carolina Football Player of the Year and the state's Mr. Football Award in his senior year. So again, dominated in high school. We like to see that. He had 1,504 rush yards, 15 touchdowns, 29 receptions, 222 yards, and 1 receiving touchdown last year. And the most yards after contact in the nation with 1,023. And he did have a lot of attempts, but he is still tied for 10th in yards after contact per attempt at 4.37. Tied for 11th in missed tackles forced. Tied for 4th in first downs with 74. And he did all that behind PFF's 101st graded run blocking line. So not a very good line. And this is, take this for what it is, but his coach, Mac Brown, claims that he runs in the 4.4s. This is going to be big for him. If he can have another highly productive season at his size and actually run sub 4.5 at the combine, I would expect to see his name get called pretty early in the 25 draft.
Yeah, that size with that athleticism, I'd be ecstatic to see that. So now that we've talked about these 6 guys, since I'm so excited about these RBs, since everyone in our community section segment was also very excited about these RBs, why don't you guys both give me, just briefly here, a couple sleepers that could climb into this conversation as well, just to get us excited?
Yeah, let me talk about Jaydn Ott out of Cal. He's listed at 6 foot, 200 pounds, but there's reports that said that he's up from 200 to 210 this spring. So that makes a big difference for running back size. He was played a little bit bigger than he is, combined with some pretty good speed and burst. He was a 4-star recruit coming out of high school. As a freshman, he ran for 897 yards, almost 900 with 8 touchdowns, and he had 46 receptions as a freshman. That's the most intriguing part. This past season, he gained 1,315 rushing yards and 12 touchdowns on the ground, but he did have a small decrease down from 46 to 25 receptions, probably because he was used more on the ground. He did this in the Pac-12, which has had a reputation for being a little weaker defensively of the Power 5 conference, but now the Pac-12 is dissolved.
Pac what?
Pac-2. What is it? Oregon I can't remember which. Yeah. Anyways, with the change in schedule, we'll see him play some other defenses, and he has a chance to climb up the ranks if he continues that production. And if he doesn't look like that added weight slowed him down, if he comes out, has a good combine testing, I'm gonna say that for a lot of these running backs with that receiving production, I mean, he could really fly up boards as well.
Yeah, and I'll go into my first sleeper. This one comes with a lot of name value. That's why I think a lot of people are high on him, though there is some SEC production. This guy is Trevor Etienne, brother of Travis. He started his career at Florida and is transferring to Georgia this season. 5'9", 213, so pretty good size. He has over 700 rushing yards in both seasons, has over 4 yards after contact per attempt in both seasons, had 34 and 35 missed tackles forced in those seasons respectively. Breakaway percentage over 45% in both seasons. Wasn't a whole lot of growth between freshman and sophomore seasons, but his freshman season was good enough that I'm not quite concerned about that yet. If we see another similar season at Georgia, maybe we'll have some concerns about why he is not improving. 21 receptions, 172 yards, and 1.34 yards per out run last season is pretty solid. He's going to Georgia. They've got a good offense. They always have a good offensive line. He should be set up for success. So if he can take advantage of that, name value plus what he's done in his first 2 seasons, I think he could have a strong case for day 2 draft capital for sure.
Give me just 1 second here. I just need to create a new show sheet for my guys for next season, because me and the nepotism. I got to make sure to put this as my guy with my Luke McCaffrey, Frank Gore, everything like that. So definitely, I love that name value. I'm a sucker for it. Of course, he's got to produce, like you said. He's got to test well at the combine, and he's got to get the draft capital. But I'm always a little bit in on that, just because in Dynasty, name recognition matters. JP, who is your next sleeper?
This is a player that I mentioned when talking about Nicholas Singleton, but it's Kaytron Allen, also of Penn State. He's the other running back that was producing alongside. He is 5'11", 221 pounds. Alongside Nicholas Singleton, Kaytron Allen, he rushed for 867 yards as a freshman. And as I mentioned, this past season, he actually surpassed Nicholas Singleton in rushing production. So maybe there's a little something there. Kaytron Allen, he's a well-rounded back who is more powerful than he is elusive, and he can help some of the pass game. He had some production, it wasn't crazy. He might not test the greatest, as some people question his long speed. He can be the type of running back who leads an NFL team in rushing touchdowns. Maybe he's a little bit more to offer. That athleticism is really going to be key for him. But I think he's a pretty solid player. And there is times where on third downs it seemed like they trusted Kaytron Allen more than their, superstar, supposed to be running back Nicholas Singleton. So I'm going to be really monitoring him this season.
Yeah, and I'll go with my final sleeper here. It's kind of a tough decision. We're not mentioning some guys that probably deserve to be mentioned in this. We talked about Devin Neal coming back last year. He probably could be mentioned here. Jordan James at Oregon, Donovan Edwards at Michigan. Just a lot of guys. This is a pretty deep class. I went with Damien Martinez, who started at Oregon State for his first 2 seasons, but is transferring to Miami for year 3. He's 6'2", 232. So similar to Kaytron Allen, he's a big bruiser kind of guy who, might be your goal line back. It is my biggest concern is his size, but it's not like he's pushing 250. If he can show that he's still athletic at that size, I think the NFL will still be pretty excited for him. He had over 1,000 scrimmage yards and 6.1 yards per attempt in both his freshman and sophomore seasons. Last year was 1,185 yards, 9 touchdowns on the ground. Only 126 yards through the air, but not awful. 57 missed tackles forced last season. I know we're hammering this home, but the biggest thing for him is going to be how does he test at his size. If he can have another good season and show that he's at least athletic enough, then I think he'll be a pretty exciting prospect. If he turns out to be a high-end athlete at that size, some people will get very hyped on him.
I mean, we just named 10 guys, and then you named an additional 3 or 4 as well that could get into this consideration. You just love to hear that there's that many potential RBs that could be in the conversation. Realistically speaking, this time next year, we're hoping that 6 to 8 of these guys, maybe a couple get day 1 draft capital would be amazing. 4 or 5 more maybe get day 2 capital, and we would just be ecstatic to have that many guys that could be potential. And when you have this many names, just have to love it. So for me, listening to you guys talk, I feel like there's a little bit of confirmation that this running back class should be strong. David, you mentioned earlier you feel like at this point, this compares pretty favorably to the 2023 running back class. Do you mind elaborating just a little bit on that briefly?
A lot of it is Ashton Jeanty. No, I think it's just about the depth. We've got enough guys that are at the top of the class that we feel good about. There's probably not a Bijan. Nobody's going to go top 10, I don't think, at least. But I do think we have a chance at a couple of first-rounders. And then if we get, maybe 2 first-round guys, and then, like you said, a handful in the day 3, I think we're going to be able to fill our running back needs very well. And that's really the most I can ask from a draft class for the running back position, honestly.
Yeah, I remember last year people saying, oh, this class, maybe it'll fill our running back room like that draft class that had Mixon, Kamara, etc. at all. That one didn't. Fingers crossed this one can. Hopefully. And after an offseason of JP and I duking it out over some wide receiver prospects, most notably when we got into it over Xavier Worthy and A.D. Mitchell even made a fun little bet in our Polarizing Prospects video, I'm excited to start seeing somebody other than me arguing. So you guys have had some friendly discourse in our sleeper chats where we've been talking about some of these wide receivers. I'm really excited to hear the strong cases you have to present. Who are the guys that we are excited to be drafting next year?
First one I want to talk about here is Tet McMillan. David, is it Tetra McMillan, I believe is what it is.
Something like that. I just call him Tet also.
He's from Arizona. He's one of the candidates to be wide receiver 1 here in 2025. He's a big, tall wide receiver profile similarly to, the T. Higgins, Mike Evans, out there Devontae Parker in there to not all have, shining names. But he was a highly recruited wide receiver. And it's not easy to find a wide receiver as productive as Tet McMillan in his first 2 college seasons. As a freshman, He broke out with 700 receiving yards and 8 touchdowns, and he followed that up with a remarkable 90 catch, 1,400 yards, and 10 touchdown seasons as a sophomore. Yeah, that's great. And also, that's 700 receiving yards as a freshman. If you guys don't know, if you get 300 or 400 plus receiving yards as a freshman, that's a good season for a freshman. But McMillan, he is set to have another huge year, and he profiles as that huge outside wide receiver. And I have to admit, sometimes these really big wide receivers make me nervous at times because sometimes they're Keon Coleman or Devontae Parker who struggle to separate and do more jump ball contested stuff. But I don't think that's what Tet McMillan is, though, because he is extremely productive, more productive than those guys were in their first 2 seasons, but still early in the process. But McMillan, over the last 2 seasons, he had a higher EPA per target than Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison Jr., and Roma Dunze, the top 3 wide receivers in this last class. So that's a very encouraging sign. But I think he's tracking to be a top 15, top 20 NFL draft pick. And he could rise, even a little higher if he has a good combine performance.
And David, can you go ahead and tell me why you think JP is wrong here with his wide receiver one for the class?
I'll say it in 2 words. It's Luther Burden. That's my guy. I will say I'd love Tet. He's a great prospect. And I do think, JP and I have been going back and forth on these 2 guys for a while now. I expect it to go through the season, and I expect to have a fun video next year. I do. But I'm not trying to take anything away from Tet here. So, get excited about both these guys. Luther, he's 5'11", 208. He's also going into his 3rd season. He's a 5-star recruit. He was ESPN's top offensive recruit, number 5 overall player in his class, number 3 overall player by 247, number 4 overall by Rivals. So regardless of who you're looking at, he was a very highly touted high school prospect. Last year had 86 catches, not quite 90, but pretty close. 1,212 yards, 9 touchdowns. He did this in the SEC, which not trying to take away anything from people that produce in other conferences, but putting up those numbers in the SEC is pretty impressive. You might be asking, well, why is this highly touted prospect playing at Missouri? He turned down offers from Alabama, Georgia, and 38 other schools to go to his home state, Missouri Tigers. So I'm guessing he grew up as a fan of this team and just wanted to live out his dream. And he's doing pretty well there. 3rd highest PFF receiving grade last season behind only Malik Neighbors and Malik Washington. Tied for 10th in yards after the catch per reception with 8.7. 5th in yards per route run. Tied for 12th in missed tackles forced. In the 7th highest PFF grade versus man and 3.44 yards per route run. And then the 2nd highest PFF grade against zone with 4.06 yards per route run, which was 3rd highest. And the 3rd highest slot grade. He did play about 80% of his snaps from the slot last year, but in his freshman year, he played a little more outside, wasn't as big of a sample size. He's not a slot-only guy, but that is maybe one of the bigger concerns to his profile. He does have a punt return touchdown, too, so he's just dangerous with the ball in his hands. I think if he can play outside enough to show front offices that he's not a slot-only guy going forward, he has a pretty good shot to lock up that wide receiver 1 spot in this class. When you saw Malik Neighbors go 6 overall, he played a lot in the slot. It's not unheard of in the NFL at all these days. So I love Burden. He's a lot of fun to watch. Some small concerns, but overall, I think these are your top 2 guys, and I think they could both be top half of the first round kind of guys.
I cannot wait to instigate through this. Just stir this pot between these 2 guys, but I'm definitely excited to hear about both of them. What are some other wide receivers I haven't already read all about you 2 arguing about that you guys can tell me and the listeners about?
Yeah, so the next name I'm going to bring up here is Evan Stewart. Him alongside Luther Burden, they were the clear top 2 wide receivers in their recruiting class coming into college out of high school. Evan Stewart, he has similar size to Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, Stephon Diggs, so he's in that archetype of wide receiver. I mean, he is a great athlete. He was actually on the U15 U.S. national soccer team before he switched full-time to football. And he also ran track in high school. He won a gold medal at Texas State meet for the best long jump. He had the 2nd best triple jump. And with a confirmed 10.58 100-meter run, Stewart, he's very fast. For reference, Jalen Wright, he ran a 10.84. So I think Evan Stewart's got a strong chance to run in the 4.3s at the combine.
I'm just excited, hoping maybe I'll get some field goal points for him sometime if the kicker gets injured on my fantasy team.
He's got that soccer background. Maybe they'll throw him in there like Dare Gumbawale, the Texans. What really made us excited about Evan Stewart outside of the high recruit status and that athleticism was as a freshman, He had a great season. For those who don't know, like I mentioned, when a freshman wide receiver puts up numbers, that's a great sign. But he had 649 yards as a freshman. That's a great mark for a freshman wide receiver. His last year, it was a little bit disappointing, though, and his season ended early due to injury. But now he's transferring over to Oregon, where he's set to replace that Troy Franklin role, where we hope he can have a healthy, bounce-back, big year. Bo Nix isn't there anymore, but they brought in a transfer quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. He's very experienced. He's a pretty good quarterback as well. So I think he can support Evan Stewart to have a breakout season potentially. I will say, out of the top 4 wide receivers we're talking about, with David talking about the 4th next, he's probably the one that has the most projection to him. I'll just give one last concern that I have with him. He's listed at 175 pounds. If he weighs in below 180, that might be a concern like Troy Franklin we saw last year. I think he's going to be faster than Troy Franklin, and I think hopefully he will be, in that 180 range like, Chris Olave and whatnot. Hopefully not coming in super late like Troy Franklin.
To hold on to hope for Troy Franklin, I heard that he actually came to the combine sick, has put on some weight since then. Please, for my Troy Franklin shares, let that be true. And please, as well, for Stewart, that he can weigh in a little bit on the heavier side as well. David, I'm a little disappointed looking at the show sheet, but it sounds like you're going to be happy again. Who are you going to talk about?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about another Buckeye. So hope my bias isn't showing, because these players are actually very good, and I'm not the only one that ranks them in these tiers.
Where are all of my Wisconsin wide receivers? Why aren't there any Wisconsin Badger wide receivers here?
Wisconsin ever had a wide receiver? I thought they were only offensive linemen and running backs.
Yeah, unfortunately. Tight ends.
Yeah, they're pretty good there, to be honest. I'm going to talk about Emeka Egbuka. He's someone this time last year we thought had a chance to be wide receiver 2 in the 2024 class. Had a little bit of a disappointing season due to injury, so he came back. Coming out of high school, he was the Washington Gatorade Player of the Year in his junior year. He's a 5-star recruit, the top wide receiver in his class, number 9 overall player. And this class included Marvin Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Xavier Worthy, just to name a few. He's 6'1", 206. His breakout season as a sophomore came alongside Marvin Harrison Jr. He had 74 catches for 1,151 yards and 10 touchdowns with 3.05 yards per route run, compared to Marvin Harrison Jr., who had 77 catches, 1,263 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 3.15 yards per route run. Very similar seasons between the two. Last year I mentioned he got hurt. It was an ankle injury. He did have the tightrope surgery, which I'm no doctor. I don't know a ton about. I know it's supposed to help your healing process for your ankle. He came back to play in 3 weeks. Typically, we see 4 to 6 weeks for return to play. He did struggle a little bit after. He wasn't off to the best start, but after he really took a dip in his numbers, 3.25 receptions per game, 37 yards receiving per game, and only 1 touchdown. Before that, he was at 4.4 receptions per game, 60.6 receiving yards, and 3 touchdowns. So like I said, not the best start to his junior season, but he really took a dip after that injury. He has 14 career rush attempts for 106 yards and 2 touchdowns, so not someone you're going to count on, like a Deebo Samuel or something like that. Maybe more like a Jaden Reed, where you can hit him on some end arounds and some things like that to just kind of enhance those numbers a little bit. 7.5 yak per reception is pretty solid. He's played mostly in the slot, 75.1% career slot percentage, but he did line up out wide in 31.9% of his snaps in his breakout sophomore season. So he has shown he can do it some. And the way the Ohio State wide receiver room projects this year, he should have more opportunity. He'll probably move around quite a bit. He can stay healthy and put together another solid season, especially with, the Ohio State wide receiver room mystique. He could easily be a first-round receiver, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. That same nepotism thing that I have for, siblings, etc., Trevor Etienne, Ohio State wide receivers does it for me in pretty much the same way. JP, who's your next guy?
I think that this is kind of where there is a little bit, if we were going to tier it, it would be a little bit of a tier break. I think Egbuka could rise as high as wide receiver 2, honestly. But the next player that I'm going to talk about, this is where I start to feel a little less confident in the wide receivers, but I want to talk about Isaiah Bond. He is 5'11", 182 pounds. He played his first 2 seasons at Alabama, and now he's transferring over to Texas. But as a high school junior, he won Georgia's 6A 100 and 200-meter championship runs and ran a best 10.48 100-meter dash. and which was a little bit faster than Evan Stewart, actually, who I talked about was very fast. So I think he's probably a lock to run in the 4.3s, and he might be the fastest wide receiver at the combine next year. He was fairly productive as well. I mean, as a freshman at Alabama, he accrued 17 receptions for 220 yards, which is solid enough for, a wide receiver playing in the Alabama star-studded, high recruit-studded wide receiver room. But in 2023, his sophomore season, he took another step forward. He had 48 receptions for 668 yards and 4 touchdowns. And that's with Jalen Milroe, who I talked about earlier. He took a lot of the production as a scrambler. He had the highest scramble rate. So the passing attack wasn't super productive. Isaiah Bond, Jermaine Burton, they were the clear top 2 options, accounting for about 50% of the receiving yards. But, Jermaine Burton, everybody, you hear pretty much any scout say if there wasn't character concerns, he had the talent to be a first-round wide receiver. And Bond was pretty close with Jermaine Burton's production last year. But he transferred over to Texas, who had 1,000 more passing yards last season. So I think that there is a breakout that we could see from Isaiah Bond. It's just some projection at this point, but that's what you just got to be doing at this point. And I'm going to bet on the Alabama and Texas tag as well as that speed.
And I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure there's this giant void opening on that Texas wide receiving core as well. So huge opportunity to step into that Xavier Worthy, Adonai Mitchell void that's left there. So interesting name to keep an eye on. David, who is your last main guy here to talk about?
Yes, a guy who I'm going to be mentioning for very similar reasons as to why JP mentioned Isaiah Bond. I would love to see these two in a race. I just looked it up as JP was talking. Brown had a 10.49 100-meter time in high school. So that would have been a photo finish there, almost to a thousandth of a second off. Or a hundredth of a second, sorry. So Brown is 6'1", 166, so a little thin, but these speed guys are kind of thinner typically, and we're seeing that being more accepting in the NFL, a little bit more common. In his 2 seasons at Kentucky, he has 85 receptions, 1,049 yards, 7 touchdowns. Does line up wide about 70% of the time. 8 out of 13.2 is pretty good, mostly used down the field. Yak per reception of 6.5 is all right, but when you consider his ADOT, that's pretty solid. Yards per out run of 2.02 is not great. 10 rushes, 121 yards. It's okay. It means you can probably use them on some end rounds and stuff like that. These are admittedly pedestrian numbers, especially when we're talking about potential round 1 draft capital. I kind of alluded to this, but the only reason I'm mentioning him here is just one word: speed. This dude is fast. If Bond's not the fastest guy in college football next year, Barion Brown could be. He was clocked at 22.6 miles per hour last year and 21.8 by Real Analytics. For reference, the top NFL speed last year, 22.23. So the 22.6 would have been the fastest time in the NFL. I know there's some other factors in there why NFL players maybe don't have an opportunity to hit their top speed, but 22.6 is ridiculous for a human being. If he can have a really good season, tests incredibly well, I think this guy could be the next Xavier Worthy type of guy where he is maybe being knocked by some people because of how fast he is.
Yeah, I mean, just having done no research into him and loving Xavier Worthy more than I could love a child if I had my own child, I do have to say the production profile worries me a little bit. Seems more in line with, the Xavier Worthy comps of the John Ross type of production profile. So he's one for me. I'm going to want to see a junior breakout for sure. So now that we've gone through some of these guys and also on those last 2 guys, come on, pick more soccer players, guys. I want guys that can kick field goals. Do you have any guys that can kick field goals in your sleepers for me? Bonus points if you do.
I already gave you mine.
And JP, who is your first sleeper here?
Speaking of these SEC fast wide receivers, I got just one more here for you, and it is Squirrel White of Tennessee. He's a little bit smaller. He's 5'10", 165 pounds. But he reportedly clocked in on, it's called Catapult. It's his GPS technology, running 23 miles per hour. I don't know how much you can trust those things, but I know this guy is fast. Real Analytics last year had him at 21.7 miles per hour in week 10. It was the highest speed. There's the only one I could find on him, but that was the highest speed of anybody in week 10, which was higher than Trey Benson, who we saw, have a really great 40-yard dash time as well. But he also was fairly productive as well. In 2022, it was his freshman season. and he was behind Bolitnikov winner Jalen Hyatt. But he produced 481 receiving yards as a freshman, which that's a pretty solid mark, as I mentioned, especially in the SEC there. And then this last year, he was the leading wide receiver for Tennessee. He had 803 yards with 67 receptions, but only 2 touchdowns, unfortunately. So this is more so betting on a guy who's going into his junior year. He's got a 5-star quarterback coming in that a lot of people are very excited about. He's already sat in season for a year. His name is Nico. I don't even want to say his last name. It's tough right now. I'll get there eventually. But yeah, I think that with the stats that he's put up so far in the SEC, if he takes another step forward with that speed, then he could be in that conversation of back of the first potentially. But he's probably going to go day 2 for sure. I'm thinking.
Yeah, and I mean touchdowns are never that sticky of a stat. So the fact that he had that good reception yard total, I think potentially he probably obviously did not have a like breakout age of last year, but you like to see that he had the yardage total at least, as that's usually easier to project forward than touchdowns. David, who is your next sleeper?
Yeah, just real quick, we haven't really mentioned this yet, but Squirrel White, 10 out of 10 name. If nothing else, I want him on my team so that I can use him for some fantasy team names.
I bet Mike McDaniel's got an eye on him too.
Yeah, probably, honestly, with that speed, man. So the first player I'm going to talk about is Tory Horton, wide receiver out of Colorado State. He's 6'2", 190. He is entering his 5th season. He has 2 seasons over 1,000 yards, though, each of the last 2 seasons. Career 237 receptions, 3,240 yards, 26 touchdowns. So a highly productive player. Lines up outside about 80% of the time. Solid 6.1 career yak per reception. Decent 2.42 career yards per out run. 21 missed tackles, forced, 57 first downs last season. Look, he's in his 5th year. He's a non-power 5 guy. That's quite an uphill battle to climb out of. But he's had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. Another really productive season, and I think he will be on some people's radar for day 2.
And it looks like we're transitioning from those speed guys to bigger wide receivers. Is that true for your next guy, JP?
Yeah, absolutely. Next guy I have here is Nic Anderson of Oklahoma, and he's at 6'4", 209 pounds, and he's coming into his junior season. We saw the NFL likes those big wide receivers with Keon Coleman, Xavier Legette, A.D. Mitchell. Even though these guys, they had relatively poor analytical profiles, and they went from pick 32 in the draft to 52. I think that Nic Anderson has a chance to be in that range as well and maybe be even more productive. Unfortunately, though, as a freshman, he didn't see the field. But as a sophomore this last year, he had a great season with 798 yards and 10 touchdowns. Funny enough, it's the same amount of yards as Keon Coleman had as a sophomore, too. But even if he has a bumpy junior year, I think he could probably still be in that day 2 conversation, much like Keon Coleman. If he has a big year as a junior, if he surpasses that 1,000 receiving yard mark, I think he has a chance to jump into that first round conversation, because at that point, he'd be a big wide receiver who's got a good analytical profile. And yeah, he's somebody I'm pretty excited about at this point.
Yeah, Nic Anderson's definitely exciting. When we were preparing for our Devy draft a couple weeks ago, I think he probably moved around my board more than anyone. I think I had him in the first at certain points. I think he settled probably in the second, but he moved around a lot. He's an exciting player, though. I love the size, love the production at this point. Guy I'm going to talk about is Tre Harris. I mentioned him earlier when I was talking about Jackson Dart. He is 6'2", 205. He's going into his 5th season, but he had 0 targets in his freshman year of 2020. We all know what happened in 2020, so I'm willing to give him a pass on that season. He transferred from Louisiana Tech to Ole Miss before the 2023 season. Last year, and I think this is not including the bowl game, 47 receptions, 851 yards, 8 touchdowns. Lined up out wide 84.4% of the time, 6.6 yak per reception, 3.18 yards per out run, though. And that was 5th in the SEC, and a 13.4 ADOT. So definitely used down the field, a very productive player. I believe he has the 2nd most returning receiving yards in the SEC behind Luther Burden. Also tied for the most touchdowns. I don't know who he's tied with, though. It's not Luther Burden. I don't think so. And then, I'm going to go back to my guy Jackson Dart that we talked about. Having a good quarterback is very good when you're trying to put together a good wide receiver season. If you don't have the guy that can get you the ball, it's going to be difficult. Jackson Dart's going to be able to get him the ball. So I think another productive season from him with his size, his profile. I'm curious to see what he runs the 40 in. If he runs a good time, puts together a good season, I think he could push for that top 50 kind of draft capital.
Yeah, some interesting names there. There are only really 4 of these guys as a more casual player. I had heard about before this offseason. This seems to be a little bit less of a strength in the running back class so far. However, if we know anything about the NFL, they tend to take wide receivers early and often in the NFL draft. So it would not surprise me if we end up being happy with this wide receiver class a year from now as well. All right. And now that we've talked about so many of these players that we're expecting to be taken next year, let's go ahead and look at some trades actually involving 25 firsts. So in the show sheet, I didn't notice you guys making as many trades lately. David, it used to be all you. If you go back to our Framing a Rookie Draft series, you used to make fun of how it was just you and then you and then you. But today it's all about me, which is fair. I actually contribute something to the show since you guys did all the rest of the work. So first trade I have here, this is the 107 in a start 9. The 107 was on the clock. Drake May had not yet been picked, but I knew the guy was going to take Drake May. I gave the 107 and a 306 for a 25 first, a team that did not make the playoffs last year, and I don't think is going to make the playoffs this year. I feel very confident betting against it, and also got the 205 that turned into Xavier Legette range of picks that I like. Curious how you guys feel about this one.
Yeah, I think if you think it's going to be an early 25 first, or at least non-playoff 25 first, that's pretty solid. But I don't hate to trade for the other guy either, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, if he does hold Drake May, that's really not adding that many points this year. You're assuming if he's going to sit for half a season or whatnot.
Yeah, this was my quarterback horde too, so I didn't need another quarterback. Next trade here, start 11, 2 tight end premium. I traded the 112, 25 first. I sent it back to the owner. So the other guy who traded with me, it was his 25 first, Kaytron Allen, DeAndre Hopkins, and I got Amon-Ra St. Brown. Did I do okay? Tell me I'm pretty.
You know, in a start 11, it's definitely a lot of pieces to give back, but you certainly got the best there by far. And I love taking advantage of a desperate owner trying to get control of their future back when you own their future first. So I think you did pretty well.
Yeah, I'm a fan of moving Keenan Allen, DeAndre Hopkins types of wide receivers. A lot of those guys, they might have little to no value next year potentially. So yeah, I don't mind that.
And in that same league, made this trade 15 minutes or so before we started recording tonight. I'm stoked. Actually, it's not like it's a great deal for me, but it's just my roster looks amazing now. Start 11, same 2 tight end premium, Rome Odunze, and my 25 first. That's going to be the 112, 100% guaranteed. What could go wrong? I still have an extra 25 first in case things do go wrong, so I can fill in gaps for AJ Brown and a 25 second.
I think we've talked about this a lot, haven't we?
We actually talked about this one, David, in our episode last week where I asked you for advice, and you kind of said, yeah, this is the general format. I'd want to make sure it's my 25 first, was exactly what you said, not a different one, and that I'd want a 25 second back. I think it's a very fair trade. JP, how do you feel about this one?
Yeah, I think if you're competing, that's a pretty solid deal just because Odunze is probably not going to give you a lot of points this year. But as a rebuilder, yeah, I don't mind going the other way as well. Get a first and Rome Odunze, who this time next year, he might be ranked, right alongside AJ Brown in Dynasty rankings.
Yeah, I don't feel like I won the deal, like, in a vacuum. I feel like it's very fair.
If you win the championship, you won.
You can both be winners. Both managers can win trades. There's nothing against that.
I just want to win a chip in this one, man. And I think I will. All right. So from all of us here at the Dino Construction Podcast, we want to thank you for joining us for this episode. We hope you found this as useful for you as it was for us. Please make sure to like and subscribe to catch our deep dive into quarterback rankings, strategy, tiers, all things quarterback in startups and just general strategy. Next week, we'll dive into. We're very excited to bring that to you. Want to make sure you catch that. So from all of us here at the Dino Construction Podcast, until next time.